observer, an onlooker, a viewer, a watcher, a bystander, and a passerby. They are the people that we refer to as witnesses. They sometimes unknowingly stand between a killer and justice. Each witness can view the same events surrounding a crime and yet uniquely remember a detail that others have missed. For some, it can be a color, the sound of a voice, or a piece of clothing, the make and model of a car that a killer was driving. Each detail, no matter how small, can move law enforcement one step closer to getting killers off our streets, or it can leave them chasing ghosts in a case gone cold. As in the case of murder victims Jane Freet, Mark Flemons, Ruth Shelton, and Daniel Davis, otherwise known as the Burgerchef murders. For the first time, we'll be able to dive into the FBI files under the Freedom of Information Act. We'll take a look at the actual redacted notes that have now been made public. We'll see what eyewitness accounts lay within the 400 pages documenting the first 2 days of the abduction and slaying of these 4 young kids. Together, you and I will take a close look at the crime itself and the investigation by local police. We'll see what important information there might be in the FBI files, and perhaps by the end of this video, you will have a clearer understanding of the anatomy of these murders. Let's begin by getting acquainted with each of the victims. This is Jane Freet. Jane worked in the fast food industry for several years. The 20-year-old was described as outgoing, hardworking, and pleasant. Burgerchef regulars often referred to her as Sweet Jane. She had just been promoted to assistant manager 3 months before her murder. The FBI noted these details about Jane. Jane had been in a serious relationship but recently broke up with her boyfriend. A week before her murder, she received some weird phone calls. The caller would ask Jane what she was wearing. Rumors among employees centered around a coworker that was about to be fired for an incident which may have been drug-related. Coworkers thought he may have blamed Jane. Jane's mother remembered a conversation they had about fast food workers being robbed and murdered. Jane told her mother that her coworker, Mark Flemons, was studying karate and said he would protect her. This is Mark Flemons. Mark had a rough go of things at the start of his sophomore year, but the 16-year-old was quickly turning his grades around. Sadly, Mark wasn't supposed to be working the night he was murdered. He traded shifts with a coworker, and then fate would step in to deal a deadly blow. The following details were found in the FBI files. Mark and his sister India were both employed at Burgerchef. Mark had recently terminated his employment at the restaurant over a breakup with a coworker. Mark's father insisted he distance himself from the girl who didn't want the relationship to end. Only after learning that the girl was no longer employed at Burgerchef did Mark's father allow him to return to work. Mark resumed his position at Burgerchef just 3 days before he was murdered. Mark's father and sister India felt that Mark and Jane Freet were close friends and were soon to be lovers. Mark was currently on probation for shoplifting and used marijuana. Mr. Flemons said Mark had a quick temper and once took a car without asking and wrecked the car. This is Ruth Shelton. Ruth, like Mark, wasn't supposed to be at the restaurant the night she was murdered. The 17-year-old had put in her resignation 3 weeks prior to her murder, but management asked her to stay a while longer. She relented. This one decision would put an end to the shy and quiet girl's dream of a career in computer science. FBI agents noted these details about Ruth. Ruth worked at a Dunkin' Donuts before her employment at Burgerchef. 3 years prior to her murder, Ruth shoplifted $20 worth of merchandise from a store. The theft was never reported after Ruth returned the items that she had taken, and no incidents ever occurred after that. Ruth had some problems with Jane. Ruth complained to management that Jane would make her do all the dirty work. The complaint against Jane was addressed, and the problem was resolved. This is Daniel Davis. Daniel was a man with a plan. The quiet 16-year-old was enthusiastic about aviation and planned to enter the Air Force after he graduated. Daniel was also an avid photographer. His parents said his dark room was filled with photos of airplanes and family. The FBI investigation turned up these facts. Daniel didn't date and was somewhat of a loner. He didn't run around much and was concerned mainly with his hobbies and employment. Daniel was a member of the Civil Air Patrol in the area. Daniel was aware of the co-worker who was about to be fired and the circumstances involving the termination. Daniel had no dealings with drugs or brushes with the law. Too young to die. So many plans, so many dreams, and they would all be erased in an instant for these 4 victims. Now let's take a look at the crime and the events leading up to it. The story begins on November 17, 1978, in the small town of Speedway, Indiana. The community of 16,000 was located on the west side of Indianapolis. Speedway is the home of the Indianapolis 500, which was usually the only event that seemed to arouse the sedate pace of the small town. That is, until just 3 months before the Burger Chef murders. In July of that year, Julia Cyphers, a 65-year-old grandmother, was gunned down in her garage, followed by 8 bombings in the first week of September. If these odd and violent events weren't enough to grip the town in fear, the Burger Chef murders would surely set everyone into panic mode. The following timeline is based on local law enforcement's investigation, eyewitness accounts, and information contained in the FBI report. November 17, 1978, 8:15 p.m. Jane's ex-boyfriend calls her at work to get a phone number of a mutual friend. During their conversation, Jane says that the evening was going smoothly and that it was unusually slow. Between 9:20 and 9:30 p.m., India Flemons and a companion were in Burger Chef. The companion remembered seeing 2 white males enter the restaurant for about 30 seconds and then depart. One man was about 25 years old, 5 feet 10 to 5 feet 11 inches tall, light brown, dirty shoulder-length hair, weighing 175 pounds, and needed shaving, wearing faded, worn-out jeans. The second individual was about 25 years of age and around the same height, medium build, same hair as the other individual, but not quite as long, also wearing jeans. She advised that the only reason she noticed them was because they were dirty and shabbily dressed. 9:30 p.m., the employee mentioned earlier, who had been in some trouble and was soon to be terminated, was scheduled to work 10 p.m. to close. He called Jane to report that he had a dead car battery. 9:45 p.m., Daniel phones his parents and tells them that they were short at work and asked permission to stay until midnight to help his co-workers. Daniel said he needed the extra hours because he needed the money for Christmas presents. His parents agreed to let him stay over. 10:30 p.m., a friend of Flemons stopped at the Burger Chef. They had planned to meet after Mark got off work and walk home together. While waiting for Mark, he decided to walk over to the Calaxio Disco in the shopping center across the street. At this time, Mark's friend didn't notice anything unusual. 10:30 p.m., a witness picked her daughter up from a roller skating party and stopped at the Dunkin' Donuts shop located beside the Burger Chef. She observed a tan or dirty white 4-door station wagon in the rear of the Dunkin' Donuts facing Burger Chef. After making her purchase, she returned to her car 5 minutes later. Once again, she noticed that the station wagon's motor was running and watched as it moved into the Burger Chef parking lot. The two individuals inside the car were described closely to that of the description India Flemons and her companion offered of the men that briefly entered the restaurant earlier. 11 p.m., Burger Chef closes. 11 p.m., a girl and her boyfriend were sitting behind the trash area of the Burger Chef near the railroad tracks. She said that they had been talking for about 10 minutes when two men appeared in front of the tracks. One individual said to them, "Do you have any ID?" and then went on to state, "Well, you'd better get out of here because there's been a lot of vandalism." She stated that the other man said nothing. The individual that spoke kept his head down and acted like he was wiping his face with a hanky. The two kids then walked over to the Dunkin' Donuts and sat behind the shop to wait for the girl's father to pick them up. During this time, they saw no one leave the Burger Chef. The girl's boyfriend's statement was slightly different. He stated that he entered the Burger Chef restaurant at 11:15 p.m. to see if they had some matches so that he and his girlfriend could smoke while they waited to be picked up. He said a few seconds after he entered, an employee with shoulder-length blonde hair came from the rear of the restaurant to see what he wanted. She provided him with the matches and then walked back to the rear. He said that he did not suspect from the female's conduct that anything was amiss. It's unknown if this witness got the time wrong or if the doors of the restaurant had not been locked yet. Remember, the Burger Chef closed at 11 p.m. The young man then left the restaurant and joined his girlfriend at the back of Burger Chef by some fencing, and it's at this point that they were approached by the two men. After being told to leave, they then walked around the Burger Chef and over to the Dunkin' Donuts to wait to be picked up. He then observed the men retracing their steps along the railroad tracks. 11:30 p.m. A second call was placed to Jane Freet from the employee with a dead car battery. He informed Jane that the battery was repaired and inquired if he was to report to work. Jane told him to report to work to help clean up. He stated that Jane's voice did not sound strange in any way. Between 11:30 and 11:55 p.m., police believe Daniel was taking trash out to the dumpster when one of the perpetrators accosted him and made their way into the restaurant through the back door to commit a robbery. 11:55 p.m. Mark Fleming's friend leaves the disco and starts to walk towards Burger Chef and notices that the lights are still on. As he walked across the field that separated the shopping center from the restaurant, he saw two males standing at the counter inside the restaurant. When he finally reached the Burger Chef, no one was inside, although the lights remained on. He continued through the parking lot and saw that the back door was completely open. He stated that he went to the door and called out to Mark Fleming several times, but got no answer. He then closed the door and headed home. He remembered seeing Freet's and Davis's cars in the parking lot. Fleming's friend said he was about 300 yards away when he saw the two men standing at the counter and could not give a detailed description. November 18th, 12:15 a.m. 17-year-old Brian Kring, an off-duty Burger Chef employee, stops to chat with co-workers. Kring found the back door open at about 3 inches. He immediately got a bad feeling. Walking inside, he noticed that all 4 money drawers of the cash registers were open, with only change remaining. The safe was open, with only currency bags left behind. Employees' purses remained at the scene. 12:20 a.m. The employee with car troubles arrives to clean up as Jane had directed him to. He parked near Kring's car and then saw Kring run out the rear door of the building. Kring made a statement that the door was open with no one inside. He accompanied Kring back inside and observed the following. The cleaning had been started, floors were still dirty, the broiler had not been cleaned, and the safe was wide open. The employee told Kring that he didn't want to get involved and left. 12:30 a.m. Kring notified management and police of what he had found. 1 a.m., a young man driving down West 15th Street, where Jane Freet's car was eventually found abandoned, stated that Freet's Vega was not there. After arriving home, he heard what sounded like a trash can being knocked over at 1:30 a.m. He stated that it may have been a car door being closed. He did not hear or see anything else during the course of the evening. 1 a.m., a witness on the south side of Indianapolis, between the restaurant and the location where the bodies of the victims were eventually found, reported being asked directions to Stone's Crossing at approximately 1 a.m. The witness advised 2 men and 3 women were in the car when the driver asked for directions. When later put under hypnosis, the witness described the car as a dark blue 69 or 70 Plymouth with some type of mud flap. He also recognized one of the female passengers as one of the victims. 1 a.m. A witness living near the murder scene told investigators she heard gunshots and a scream at around this time. At the time, her husband told her it was just a program that he was watching on TV. Other neighbors recalled dogs barking at about this same time, but no one ever investigated. 4:30 a.m. Jane Freet's car is recovered at 5500 West 15th Street. The location was 1.5 miles from the Burger Chef. The rear door of the police department was visible from where the car was dumped. The driver's door was locked, however, the passenger door was unlocked and not completely closed. The keys to the car were later found on Freet's body. 10:15 a.m. 11 hours after the abduction of the 4 victims, the FBI was notified. November 19th, 3 p.m. A couple out walking found the bodies of Freet, Flemons, Shelton, and Davis in the secluded wooded area of Stone's Crossing. The gruesome murder scene was only 22 miles from the Burger Chef. As you can see from the timeline, each witness uniquely remembered different details surrounding the last hours of the victims' lives. Were their accounts accurate, and did they get the times correct? Before we analyze certain details of the timeline, let's take a look at the investigation by local law enforcement. It will quickly become clear that the slow response and shoddy work of the officers would make the apprehension of the killers nearly impossible. Here is how the investigation unfolded. Officers arrived at the Burger Chef sometime after 12:30 a.m. They took a brief look around and noted that the purses of Freet and Shelton remained at the scene, along with a coat and a flannel shirt. Officers surmised that the employees took the restaurant's money and disappeared of their own volition. It was a simple case of kids ditching work to go party. The officers told management to lock up with permission to open the restaurant at their usual time. As we've stated, Jane Freet's car was found abandoned at 4:30 a.m. As the pieces of the puzzling disappearance fell into place, officers realized that they had made a grave error. This wasn't a case of kids off partying, as they first assumed. They were looking at a robbery kidnapping. With this realization, officers returned to the Burger Chef. But it was too late. Employees had opened the restaurant that morning and finished cleaning up from the night before. Counters were wiped down, floors were mopped, and the trash had been taken away. Any remaining evidence from the crime was now gone or contaminated by employees and customers. In an unethical move, police decided to restage the crime scene from memory. The currency bags, coat, flannel shirt, and purses were placed back into position and photos were taken. But the incompetence of law enforcement wouldn't end there. Once the bodies of the victims were found in an isolated wooded area, it too would become a contaminated crime scene. Officers failed to rope off the area, and vehicles have been allowed to drive over the field, destroying what could have been crucial evidence. Some officers claimed that some of the bodies had been moved before forensics arrived, and further stated that the chaotic scene had too many chiefs and not enough Indians. All of these careless mistakes would forever haunt this case. Police believe from the position of the bodies that there were enough killers to cover 3 different locations in the woods. This would account for 3 different murder methods. There was also no evidence that the victims had been bound and gagged. The FBI reported that the bodies of Shelton and Davis were found 75 yards from Stony Creek Road. Laying side by side, face down, Ruth and Daniel were shot execution style with a .38 caliber gun. Jane Freet was located 30 to 40 yards to the south of Shelton and Davis. Mark Flemons was found 75 to 80 yards due west of Shelton and Davis. Police could not rule out the possibility that Jane and Mark may have been attempting to flee when they were struck down. Jane was stabbed twice by what police believed to be a hunting knife. The perpetrator stabbed her once in the chest as he was facing her, and as she turned away, he grabbed her by the neck from behind and stabbed her again. Jane was stabbed with such force the second time, the 5-inch blade broke off in her chest. Mark Flemons was beat about his head with what authorities believe may have been a chain. His injuries were not enough to kill him. The fact that the perpetrators left him face up on the ground was cause for Mark to drown in his own blood. It had rained the day of the murders, and yet the victims' shoes were free of mud. Their uniforms were not soiled or snagged by any of the thick underbrush. In fact, there appeared to be no struggle from any of the kids. The FBI remarks about the victims' bodies declared that there was no signs of a sexual assault. All were fully clothed and had no defensive marks or wounds. The time of death was established as early as Saturday morning, November 18th, before first light. Police theorized that this was a robbery gone wrong. $581 was missing from the restaurant, yet the victims' purses remained untouched, and no jewelry was taken from the victims. They believe the employees were herded into Freet's car and possibly one other. Freet's Vega was then driven a short distance from the restaurant and abandoned in a residential neighborhood. The victims were then transported to Stony Creek Road, about 24 miles from the Burger Chef, and murdered. Questions that are most puzzling about this case are why were the victims taken from the Burger Chef and then murdered? In most restaurant robberies, the victims are almost always killed at the scene. And why was Jane's car taken and Daniel's car left behind? If we go back to the timeline, the one eyewitness account that stands out the most is the one given by Mark Flemons' friend. At 11:55 p.m., the friend goes to the open back door of the restaurant and calls out for Mark but gets no answer. At this time, Jane's car is seen in the parking lot. We can assume at this point that the victims were still in the restaurant with their abductors and were perhaps kept silent by gunpoint. Had Mark's friend went inside, he could possibly have become a victim himself. Then we have the fact that Jane was wearing her jacket when her body was found. For whatever reason, the jacket became a focus of law enforcement. The jacket was submitted to the FBI for latent fingerprinting examination. It was noted that the perps may have had multiple points of contact with the jacket throughout the evening. Before departing the Burger Chef, while Freet was held hostage, and at the time of her murder. The keys to her car were also found in the pocket. No latent prints of value were lifted from the jacket. If one of the victims recognized one of the killers, Which one was it? Authorities believe that it may have been Mark because he wasn't supposed to be there that night. Was it possible that one of the victims was the target, and the crime was never really about robbery at all? Here are 4 compelling points of interest that slowly emerged as investigators ramped up their efforts to bring the killers to justice. What may be the first major component to understanding just what happened to these 4 young victims is what was happening inside Burger Chef a year before the murders. Major Robert Allen, head of the Indiana State Police Investigators Unit, confirmed that one and maybe more than one of the victims used marijuana. The names were withheld at the time, but comments recorded in the FBI files alluded to those victims being Freet and Flemons. A former employee of the restaurant told a reporter that drugs were being sold out of the back of Burger Chef. Chief Robert Copeland confirmed his department had information that the restaurant's restrooms were being used as drop points for drugs. Investigators were told that drugs, mainly high-grade marijuana, were left in restrooms for buyers who paid in advance. Undercover narcotics agents were used for surveillance of the restaurant, but could not obtain enough evidence for arrests. Does this information open the door to the possibility that one of the victims may have had information that put their life and others in danger? As of now, no evidence of this has been proven. The second point of interest comes into play with Brett Coleman Kimberlin, a 24-year-old drug trafficker who was under investigation for the murder of Julius Cyphers that occurred just 4 months before the Burger Chef murders. The theory goes that Kimberlin ordered a hit on Cyphers, whose granddaughter was said to tell police what she knew about Kimberlin's trafficking ring. Kimberlin then set off a series of 8 bombs over a 5-night period in the first week of September of '78. This was to divert attention away from Cyphers' murder. Kimberlin was found guilty of the bombings, but was never charged with Cyphers' murder. No link was ever found to the Burger Chef murders, but nevertheless, the close proximity of events to the murders have left many residents questioning if there was a connection. The final 2 points of interest come to us with the arrest and conviction of a serial killer and an inmate serving a life sentence. Each of their names appear in the FBI file, and their possible involvement remains debatable among those investigating this case. Roger Dale Stafford, his brother Harold, and his wife Vera went on a killing spree from 1974 until his capture in 1979. The convicted serial killer was executed in '95 for the robbery and murders of 6 employees at the Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Oklahoma, and the robbery and murders of a family of 3 also in Oklahoma. Interestingly enough, Stafford drove a 4-door station wagon. His wife Vera stated that he was in Speedway at the time of the murders. No connection to Stafford in this case could ever be made. Then we have Donald Forrester, an inmate serving a 95-year sentence for rape in Pendleton Correctional Facility in Indiana. In 1984, he confessed to his involvement in the murders. This is what he said happened that night. Forrester claimed that Jane Freed's brother was involved in the local drug trade and owed someone a lot of money. Forrester and his buddies were hired to go to the restaurant and threaten Jane in order to get her brother to pay up. Forrester stated that Mark Flemons stepped in to protect Jane and was hit, causing him to fall and hit his head. Believing they had killed Mark, they decided to take the others to the woods to carry out the murders in order to avoid prison time. Forrester gave details that were never made public. Forrester's wife claimed that the 2 of them went to the woods soon after the murders, and she watched as Forrester picked up .38 caliber casings from the ground. She stated that the casings were then taken home and flushed down the toilet. A search of the septic tank found the .38 caliber shell casings. Believing Forrester may be telling the truth, he was given 2 polygraph tests which he failed. Forrester later recanted his confession, and prosecutors thought there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with the murders. Law enforcement was divided about whether Forrester was telling the truth. Indiana State Trooper Jim Kramer stated that he thought Forrester was lying in order to get special treatment in prison. He believed that Forrester's knowledge of the crime came from someone incarcerated with him that actually committed the murders. The Sheriff's Department still believes Forrester was somehow involved. Forrester died in prison in 2006. 45 years later, we still don't have the answers we are looking for. Was this a simple case of a robbery gone wrong? Were the murders linked to a local drug ring? Should we believe the confession of a desperate convicted felon? I think Ruth Shelton's sister summed up how all of us feel about this horrible, senseless act of violence that took the lives of 4 young kids on November 17, 1978, at a Burger Chef in Speedway, Indiana.
I guess why I'm here is not to talk about an investigation or a case. I'm here to talk about people. These aren't just victims. That was my sister. That was her co-worker. Jane, Mark, Daniel, and Ruth are real people with real families, with real friends that deserve justice. But when there's a murder involved in this, it's harder to move on because all of the boxes, all of those steps that are supposed to be taken aren't complete. We don't have all the answers. And there's someone out there that does.
If you have any information about the murders of Jane Freet, Mark Flemons, Ruth Shelton, and Daniel Davis, please contact the Speedway, Indiana Police Department at 317-246-4300. Thank you for tuning in today. If you like our videos and would like to help our channel grow, please consider sharing this video with a friend. Also, if you aren't already subscribed to EOJ, please consider doing so. It's completely free, and it's the best way to stay in the loop about our channel and get notified when videos will be uploaded. As always, stay well and be safe. Until we see you again with another cold case, this has been Eye on Justice.